Well, hello everybody, and welcome once again to Markham's Arkham, where today I will be discussing the 1982 fantasy adventure, Ator the Fighting Eagle, directed by Joe D'Amato, and starring Miles O'Keefe, Sabrina Ciani, and Ritza Brown. Ator the Fighting Eagle, not your typical swaggering barbarian. He's the glam rock barbarian opening for Gorky Park at Wembley Stadium. He's surprisingly gentle, honorable, polite, and almost aristocratic. A suave, soft-spoken badass. That's because Miles O'Keefe doesn't play him like Schwarzenegger's Conan or Singer's Dar in The Beastmaster. He isn't driven by rage or revenge. He comes across as someone who'd rather solve problems without being cruel. That makes him a bit of an oddball among 1980s fantasy heroes. He's closer to a fairy tale knight than a barbarian, making the film a bit more interesting than its reputation suggests. It's absolutely a Conan cash-in, don't get me wrong, but like a lot of Italian exploitation films, it accidentally reveals something about the era that produced it. That is, the early 80s saw more women in action-oriented roles, not always written with much depth, but often portrayed as capable companions. Such as Sunya in this movie, one of its strongest elements. Unlike a lot of fantasy girlfriends from the era, she actually participates in the adventure. She fights, she's resourceful, and she isn't constantly waiting to be rescued. This doesn't make Ator a feminist manifesto, however, but it does give its female lead more agency than many people would expect from a 1980s fantasy film. I personally dig the male-female team-up a lot. It does make practical sense for any man or woman to be able to fight in a world full of monsters, slavers, and invading armies. Monsters, slavers, and invading armies? Fuck, it makes practical sense for men and women to be able to fight today. Anyway, in a place like that, it's just survival. Then there's the lame-ass Spider King. I do dig the spider theme as well, but it would have been much cooler if they did it right. The Spider King, however, was a bit on the lame side. He's the weakest major element in the movie. He doesn't feel mythic and never acts extremely villainous or threatening, and doesn't inspire fear at all. He mostly sits around waiting for the climax and totally goes down pretty easily at the end. For someone called the Spider King, you'd expect a villain who manipulates, deceives, or dominates. Instead, he barely establishes himself as a threat before Ator defeats him. But there are layers here. Take Griba, Ator's adoptive father, who ends up betraying Ator in one of the film's biggest dramatic twists. Although handled with a kind of earnest absurdity, there's a web scene where the set is unintentionally hilarious. The web looks like ropes stretched across a stage, and the victim doesn't appear trapped by adhesive silk. They look like someone tied them up for a school play. Griba tries sacrificing her and Ator to the giant spider, but becomes the sacrifice instead, in a wonderful bit of hilarious, stupid irony. So, is this movie some shallow fantasy adventure just for the sake of wasting time, or could it be saying something more? It's certainly designed first and foremost to capitalize on the post-Conan fantasy boom, but beneath that, there are recurring themes: destiny versus free will, noble birth versus chosen family, corruption through power, innocence overcoming tyranny, and courage over brute strength. But still, these themes are nothing new. It's what fantasy has been built on and explored in great depth for centuries. Amazingly, Ator went on to become one of the longest-running sword and sorcery franchises of the decade, spawning 3 sequels. Despite not being nearly as famous as Conan or the Beastmaster, it became a surprisingly durable series. Ator isn't a great movie, but it's a fascinating snapshot of the early 80s fantasy explosion. A film made to cash in on Conan that accidentally carved out its own oddly charming identity. And with that said, I do thank you all for being here. If you like having films explored in great depth and behind the scenes exposés and forgotten, buried underground gems that you may not have ever been exposed to if not for this channel, then I do invite you to like, share, subscribe, and pass it along to all your friends and family, to Ator and to Sienna and Griba, Ritza and Miles and Joe Diamato and Mr. O'Keefe and Mark Singer and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Conan the Barbarian and the Beastmaster and Sunya. And don't forget Gorky Park, all the current members, Oleg Izatov, Tim Grigorovich, Sergei Arutyanov, Marco Mendoza, Kenny Aronov, Oleg Hoyrin, Nick, and all the past members. Let's put them dear and near to our hearts as saying thank you for being members of Gorky Park and filling our lives with all that wonderful music in the first place. And if any of you are former members because you have since passed, then much peace be with you, and our hearts go out to you and your family. And that is Nikolai Noskov, Alexander Marshall, Alexei Belov, Jan Yanenkov, and Alexander Lvov, or would it just be Vov? Is the L silent? I don't know. If I mispronounced any of those names and butchered the fuck out of them, well, my roots are not Russian, they're German, so I do apologize, and I hope that you bear with me. And until next time, I hope all of you take care of yourselves and maybe take up some sword and sorcery to learn to defend your asses against the coming AI robotic onslaught that is certainly inevitable, it seems, at this point, with no outstanding regulations or anything to fucking curb or halt its fucking development and exploration, with the public admittance of AI CEOs stating that it is certain to wipe out humanity and destroy the planet, but, we'll make billions of dollars in the meantime, so who gives a fuck? And with that said, until next time, hope you all sleep well with that thought. Peace.